welcome to this week's episode of Wide Angle. The Cold War ended officially in 1989, but many observers say now 30 years after that, the US and Russia are locked in a new sort of Cold War, where the two states use everything at their disposal, from cyberspace to nuclear technology and everything else in their arsenal, possibly against each other. Talking about global politics, the US-Russia equation, Russia and China, and the impact on global peace and security is with us Sergey Karaganov, the Dean of the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, and has been also in an unofficial capacity a key foreign policy advisor to several successive Russian leaders. Mr. Karaganov, thank you very much for giving us some of your time. I think first off the bat, I'd like to ask you, since we introduced this with the tensions between Russia and the United States right now, a recent report 2 days ago in the Washington Post indicate that both countries, who are at opposite ends perhaps of the conflict in Syria, actually worked together to defuse a crisis where Russian mercenaries were killed in what was apparently a US strike. Tell us about it.
Well, first of all, Russia is not engaged in Cold War with the United States. The United States is engaged in Cold War with Russia, and we are looking at it with some amazement. It is exactly the second edition of Reagan-style Cold War. The United States wants to restore a position it had lost previously. They are not restorable. So we are looking at them with some amazement, with some concern, because it's dangerous. But this time I think we shall win. That's one thing. Or hopefully nobody would lose. As to the Syrian war, nobody wanted Russia to win. But we came to there to support the regime, because we thought that it is the only way to keep the country afloat. Otherwise, if we wouldn't come to the support of the regime, by now, a huge country on the border on the Mediterranean would have been under control of ISIS, Daesh, Al-Nusra, which is Al-Qaeda, of all the worst possible things in the world. So, and of course, as nobody wanted Russia to be victorious, our Western colleagues, our friends, are bitter. So they're now trying to dilute this victory, but at the same time they're not interested in further exacerbation of terrorism. So it is a strange maneuvering. In addition, you have 15 groups fighting within Syria, and nobody knows, whom they are, and they are floating between each other, mixing. So it's a very complex situation. But I think we have overcome a certain threshold, whereas it is clear that Syria will survive, with or without United States.
Well, before we come back to the US-Russia equation and the amazement that you said the Russians are viewing it with, let's just stick to this issue of terrorism and ISIS as well. As you know, you're in Delhi right now. As you know, India has had an issue as far as cross-border terrorism is concerned, and is looking at the wider South Asian region and the security situations with a fair amount of concern. There have been recent reports that Russia and Pakistan now want to collaborate and find ways to fight ISIS in Afghanistan. That is something that's clearly alarming to New Delhi.
I think we are coordinating with New Delhi our policies there, and will be happy that New Delhi will join their grand coalition against terrorism. Of course, I know your tensions within Pakistan. Everything what is done together with Pakistan sometimes is seen as negative to India, but we have Afghanistan there. The country which is key to Afghanistan's security is Pakistan. We are practical. We, as in the Middle East, as there, we are working with those who could help in diluting or doing away with the danger of this cancer spreading. Cancer meaning terrorism.
You say that your experience in the Middle East, as things stand, indicate to the Russians that America is not really interested in pursuing this war against terrorism, which is why it's played out the way it has. Elaborate a little bit on that, because that's not the message one gets from Washington.
We saw, of course, the United States for many years was a force for stability in the Middle East. I mean, for many years. I mean, people liked it or didn't like it. It was different matters depending on where you belonged. But it looks like during last decades, first due to incompetence, which gross incompetence, I mean, of American elites, which pushed themselves into losing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and blew up the whole Middle East, and then supported, I mean, Arab Spring, which made the situation even worse. It was incompetence. Maybe most people in the world, maybe even in India, believe that that is a clever plot. I know it was incompetence, ideologically driven incompetence. First and second, the United States are losing interest in their stability in the Middle East because they are becoming independent in terms of oil. So in the future Middle East and future larger Middle East, there will be only those countries playing which have a stake in this area, and that is Russia, India, and China.
Russia, India, and China.
Sooner or later we'll have to. Now Russia is only filling the void. But sooner or later you'll have to do that together with us, hopefully with the Chinese, because we are there, and we are interested in the stability in West-South Eurasia.
In fact, it's interesting you say that, because you've been quoted in previous interviews as saying that global peace and security now sort of rests with China and Russia. And you position the two against the United States, in a sense, that's vying for this regaining of a space globally. India has a strategic partnership with the United States. We're also, we have an engagement with China that also depends on keeping our borders stable with China. Russia is an old friend. But it's a complicated balance for India to manage diplomatically as well, because there are independent equations with all three countries. The Russians and the Chinese, as things stand, don't seem to want to engage with the United States as it is today.
Well, first of all, I mean, both China and Russia originally thought about Big Three and about engaging with the United States. What is happening in the United States, they are a non-partner at the juncture. They simply couldn't do. Not only because some of its policies are hostile, but because they are totally engulfed in suicidal civil war. Within the elites are killing each other. I mean, and not only Trump, anti-Trump elites, those who are killing Trump or trying to kill Trump are killing themselves, because the world is looking at what they are doing. So United States is a non-partner. Of course, India, like any other country, has to balance, and it has been very good in balancing over the last 70 years. So it has to balance, but it is clear that the future of India is in Eurasia. So we'll have to build up this triangular relationship, one way or another, because we are the most important players, most responsible, and hope, and in principle, in spite of all the difficulties we would have them with China too, we have common long-term interests, stability and growth in Eurasia, while other actors do not such a stake. That's as simple as that.
Coming back to the United States, you're talking about the elites kind of killing each other in the United States as well, the Trump elites, now as well as their predecessors, I suppose. But really, the conversation in the United States vis-a-vis Russia is that of an arch rival, a nation that has willingly and knowingly interfered in the electoral process. In fact, there are indictments against 13 Russian trolls right now. Tell us a little bit about how that's been seen in Russia. Yeah.
I would have been proud and happy if 1% of the allegations is true. That means that Russia is omnipotent. I mean, of course it is. It's so humiliating to listen to that. These are all lies. I mean, on 99% lies. Maybe these 13 people, I mean, sending 80,000 tweets which is nothing. I mean, among billions upon billions, which are, I mean, floating there. Maybe they were there, but there were no other credible allegations whatsoever. What you get is only alleged, nothing. So I know why it is happening.
Why
United States first needs an enemy because it is now in a process of inner struggle. But more importantly, American elite has lost control of a political process. And there was a popular revolution which took Trump, a non-elite person, to power. So the elite is trying to put this political process under control. Mostly, by the way, they want to put under control the social media, which gave their independent groups out of control of elite a say. So for that they need an enemy saying, I mean, come on, we're defending against Russia. They are trying to limit U.S. democracy and to take back the control over the political process. That is, by the way, I somewhat sympathize with them. But when I see what is how they do that, that reminds me of the absolutely worst times in American history, McCarthyism of the 50s, then creating artificial threats, like again in the 50s they created a missile gap. They told that Russia had, Soviet Union, had 100 times more missiles than nuclear weapons. It was vice versa. The United States had 100 times more. So that is what is happening. I am saying, and I am telling that on American TV. If I am asked, I would have been proud and happy if we would have done 1% of what we are being accused. All the more that our American partners and future friends should be taught a lesson. They should not interfere into internal affairs of other countries with all kinds of revolutions. So they would, but I'm afraid.
So are you saying none of these allegations are true at all?
I hope 1%. I hope, but I'm maybe 1.5. I hope 0.5%.
Because I mean they're quite serious. They're about Russian trolls putting out fake news, influencing opinion.
Read attentively. I mean, no hard data. It is all, I mean, allegations. Everybody believes in that. It's a panic. There's a panic within the American elite. They are really losing their control over their own political process. That's their own tragedy. And they're trying to get out of this situation by creating an enemy. So, I mean, make my day. But of course it is dangerous because at the same time they want to rerun the Reagan-type arms race, which in the situation which is already highly unstable, international security situation, it's much worse than any time since '63. So it is dangerous. They are dangerous for themselves and for the world. But we are relatively calm.
But
and we will deter them. So don't be afraid.
I'm not afraid. You don't.
No, I mean the world should not be afraid.
You don't see this as a confrontation in a sense once again between the U.S. and the West, the rest of the West, Western Europe, and Russia when it comes to these charges or this concern that if the Russians have played this role, which you deny in the United States. There were reports about the German elections. This is something that's a cause for worry, or is this a different philosophy and ideology that's becoming the concept?
I'm sorry. We're having a very nice conversation, and I'm telling that you're repeating lies. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say. We were, let me remind you, we were blamed for Catalan referendum after it happened already. We were blamed for Brexit. We are blamed for everything which runs against the will of the current elites, which have failed, of the West, which are failing, and which are trying to, to grasp at a foreign artificial threat to rationalize their attempts to survive.
So in your mind, what is the greater ideological war that's being played out?
The war is a desperate defense of the West, which is losing, not to Russia, to the world. It is they have. There was a very. I mean, I will talk about it during my presentation tomorrow. They in the last decade, or let's say since 2005, the West, which thought it to be totally victorious, end of history, all of a sudden started to collapse. I mean, one failure after another, geopolitical failures, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and then of course the crisis of 2008, and then crisis after crisis within European Union. It is not. We have a geopolitical competition between Russia, China, and the West. Normal.
Okay.
But this time there is no ideological element. There used to be two competing ideologies. Russia, I think we have, our own message to the world, to which probably 80% of the world will subscribe, but we are not competing. They are defending themselves.
So a couple of questions that emerge from that. One is, this sort of phase of unmitigated hostility or confrontation between the United States and Russia is not something which is tenable for the rest of the world right now. And the second is that if this continues in Eurasia that we're talking about, where China is kind of providing this economic heft to what is a global attempt to create unions and partnerships on this side of the world, and Russia is looking at it strategically. How will that play out for other smaller nations? Leave alone India, but other smaller nations in this sphere of influence?
It will be hard. First, we have to understand that the domination of the West is over. It's over. Forget about it. You live in the world, and that happened due to, very deep factors. But it happened actually before, but came to the fore during the last decade, and that is the deepest source of this many things which are happening there. As to the other nations, I think Russia is willing to be the main security provider. China is willing to be the provider of economic benefits. India is an important player in both, and if we join hands, I am sure Eurasia would be the center of the world and a happy center of the world. By the way, do you know already that the economic center of the world, which was only 40 years ago somewhere to the west of the British Isles, now is somewhere around Turkey, and in 10 to 15 years will move to your border with China. You'll be the center of the world. So you'll have to take responsibility too. So you're not a victim, by the way. You are the winner. And interestingly enough, when countries like China or Russia are accused of revisionism, we are not. We are a new status quo. India is also new status quo because you are winning.
So what is your advice for Indian diplomacy and Indian governments and how to navigate this? Because these independent relationships are important. India has had a principle of non-alignment. There's conflict with Pakistan. There's conflict with China, albeit different. What is the advice you give to the Indians?
First of all, I think the Indians are smart enough not to listen to foreign advice. So
yes,
if I were Indian, I would have built a triangle relationship between Russia, India, and China, because it will be the core. It should be the core of stability for the future world. Of course, you have a problem with China, which I could not quite understand. It is history based. But I think, of course, Pakistan. You are left with Pakistan. It's your fate. You couldn't do away with it. So, but eventually, I think that maybe through Shanghai Organization and others, maybe through triangle relationship, we should try to partially solve these problems, and Russia will be probably happy to provide a role of intermediate if needed and if asked, because we are not interested in weakening of India. We are not interested in overall strengthening of China. which the idea of greater Eurasia, which Russia is pushing with some support of China, but not necessarily, is has one tooth. First is creating two ideas behind it. One is creation of a new space of development in the world through connectivity, through mediation. All the more that we see that it didn't happen in the Asia Pacific, in the Pacific Ocean. It is not happening in the Atlantic. Atlantic is growing larger. Here it is clear will be the future of the world, and it should be. We should work towards it together. The second is that China, with whom we have excellent relations, is growing very fast.
That's right.
And we are telling to the Chinese. I'm telling that to the Chinese on their television, or writing with them, or talking to their to their policy planning. They need to create a web of institutions which will balance them. Otherwise, they will be seen as a threat. Not even because they are aggressive. They are not, but because they are too strong. You are probably, concerned about them not because they are openly aggressive, but because you see there is a gap.
Gaining strength. That's right.
Building strength. So let us build a relationship which balances.
That gaining strength is not a threat to Russia at all?
As I've said, we want to create a web of institutions, balances, including relations with India, friendly, so that the Chinese rise would be not seen and will not be felt as a threat. For them, it is in the interests of China, because the Chinese are only new to this grand world role. They are for the first time becoming a global power.
Well,
they've been the original one. As we all know, for
right.
For 4,000 years, and they have to understand that if they become global and act as a middle kingdom, they will have problems. And the Chinese are learning well, but of course there are all kind of problems. And there are countries outside of Eurasia which want us to fail and to fight each other.
Right, Sergey Karaganov, we'll have to unfortunately leave it at that. It's fascinating conversation, lots of warnings, lots of advice for India, for the rest of the world.
I'm not advising India.
Not in an official capacity, as we said,
yes,
not as an observer. Right, Mr. Karaganov. But of course, I think people in Delhi will be looking forward to listening to you with a great amount of attention and careful detail.
I'll be delighted
Thanks
to share
very
my
much
views,
for
but
sharing
I'm
your
not teaching
views.
and giving advice.
All right, thank you very much
I
for
could
sharing
do that only in my own country.
your views on Wide Angle. Thank you all,
Thank you.
and thank you all
It
so
was a
much
great
for
pleasure.
watching.
Thank you.